Amalek is a figure in the Hebrew Bible. According to the book of Genesis in 1 Chronicles, Amalek was the son of Eliphaz and the concubine Timna. Timna was a Horite and sister of Lotan. Amalek was the grandson of Esau, who was the chief of an Edomite tribe. At Genesis 36:16, Amalek is described as the chief of Amalek, and thus his name can be construed to refer to a clan or a territory over which he ruled. Josephus calls him a bastard, though in a derogative sense. A late extra-biblical tradition, recorded by Nachmanides, maintains that the Amalekites were not descended from the grandson of Esau but from a man named Amalek, from whom the grandson took his name. Amalekites. The Amalekites were a people mentioned a number of times in the book of Genesis, and considered to be Amalek's descendants. In the chant of Balaam at Numbers 24:20, Amalek was called the first of the nations, attesting to high antiquity. The name is often interpreted as dweller in the valley, and occasionally as warlike, people of prey, cave men. In some rabbinical interpretations, Amalek is etymologized as a people who lick blood, but most specialists regard the origin to be unknown. In Arabic, the corresponding term for the biblical Amalek is ʻŌmālēq, whose descendants Al-Squared Amalek were early residents of the Ain Aram at Mecca, later supplanted by the Banu Jurhum, and formed one of the first tribes of ancient Arabia to speak Arabic. Some interpret Gen 14:7 to mean that the Amalekites existed as early as the time of Abraham, in the region that would later become the Roman province of Arabia Petraea. This view is similar to Nachmanides' claim of an origin for the Amalekites earlier than Esau's grandson. However, the passage in question does not require this interpretation, as it may be referring to the region by a name from a later era. However, the Arab historian Abu al-Hasan al-Mazangstram, citing traditional Arab history, relates that the Amalekites did indeed exist at this early period, having originated in the region of Mecca before the time of Abraham. In the Pentateuch, the Amalekites are nomads who attacked the Hebrews at Rephidim in the desert of Sinai during their exodus from Egypt, smiting the hindmost, all that were feeble behind. The Tanakh recognizes the Amalekites as indigenous tribesmen, the first of the nations. In the southern lowlands too, perhaps the dry grazing lands that are now the Negev, there were aboriginal Amalekites who were daunting adversaries of the Hebrews in the earliest times. They dwelt in the land of the south, from Havilah until thou comest to Shur. At times said to be allied with the Moabites and the Midianites. One may consider the hypothesis that each of their kings bore the hereditary name of Agag. They also attacked the Israelites at Hormah. Saul and his army destroyed most of the people, and earned Samuel's wrath for leaving some of the people and livestock alive against God's command. Saul and the tribal leaders also hesitated to kill Agag, so Samuel himself executed the Amalekite king. Agag's death might have been expected to have been the end of the Amalekites. However, they reappear in later periods described in the Bible. Even Samuel said to Agag, "As thy sword hath made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women." 1 Samuel 15:33, before he hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord. War against the Amalekites, as the Jewish Encyclopedia put it, David waged a sacred war of extermination against the Amalekites, who may have subsequently disappeared from history. Long after, in the time of Hezekiah, 500 Simonites annihilated the remnant of the Amalekites that had escaped on Mount Su, and settled in their place. The biblical relationship between the Hebrew and Amalekite tribes was that the Amalekite tribes without provocation pounced on the Hebrews when they were weak. The Amalekites became associated with ruthlessness and trickery and tyranny, even more so than Pharaoh or the Philistines, and required a ruthless response. 8 Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. 9 So Moses said to Joshua, choose for us men, and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand at 10 So Joshua did as Moses told him, and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. 11 Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. 12 But Moses' unregistered trademark hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side, and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the Sunday. 13 And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. 14 Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven of 15 And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, The Lord is my banner, 16 saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord Jacob. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. This enmity is repeated in Numbers 24, in Balaam's fourth and final oracle, 20 Then he looked on Amalek and took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the first among the nations, but its end is utter destruction. And again in the law, in Deuteronomy 25, 17 Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt, 18 How he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary, and cut off your tail, those who were lagging behind you, and he did not fear God. 19 Therefore when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies around you, in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. The fighting is mentioned again in Judges 3:13, in the judgeship of Ehud, and again under Gideon, as the Amalekites allied with the Midianites. This enmity is also the background of the command of the Lord to Saul, 2 Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. 3 Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Saul's failure to obey this command cost him his kingship. Note the commentary on this total destruction later by Samuel, when Saul summons him from the dead through prophetic vision literary tool, 16 And Samuel said, Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? 17 The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor, David. 18 Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Flavius Josephus also commented on this event, he betook himself to slay the women and the children, and thought he did not act therein either barbarously or inhumanly. First, because they were enemies whom he thus treated, and, in the next place, because it was done by the command of God, whom it was dangerous not to obey. The destruction of animals and booty, however, was not universal at Saul's time. This was evidently a command for a particular battle. His contemporary David handled the matter differently a few years later. 8 Now David and his men went up and made raids against the Geshurites, the Gizites, and the Amalekites, for these were the inhabitants of the land of old, as far as Shur, to the land of Egypt. 9 And David would strike the land and would leave neither man nor woman alive, but would take away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the garments, and come back to Achish. Survival of the Amalekites. It is not clear if the historical Amalekites were exterminated or not. 1 Samuel 15:7 8 states that he took Agag king of the Amalekites alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. This implies that after Agag had been killed so were all the people of Agag, who consequently became extinct. In a later story in the time of Hezekiah, however, the Simonites annihilated a group of Amalekites on Mount Su and settled in their place, and 500 of these Simonites, led by Pelatiah, Neriah, Rephaiah and Uzziel, the sons of Ishi, invaded the hill country of Su. They killed the remaining Amalekites who had escaped, and they have lived there to this day. Haman and the Book of Esther. In the Book of Esther, the arch-villain is Haman, an Amalekite who led the plot to kill the Jews. Because the Lord promised to blot out the name of Amalek, it is customary when the Book of Esther is read at the Purim festival, for the audience to make noise whenever Haman is mentioned, so that his name is not heard. Ethical issues. Some commentators have discussed the ethics of the commandment to exterminate all the Amalekites, including the command to kill all the women, children, and the notion of collective punishment. Nachmanides explains that the commandment of killing out the nation of Amalek requires the Jewish people to peacefully request of them to accept upon themselves the Noachide laws and pay a tax to the Jewish kingdom. only if they refuse must they be physically killed. Some commentators, such as Rabbi Chaim Palagi, argued that Jews had lost the tradition of distinguishing Amalekites from other people, and therefore the commandment of killing them could not practically be applied. Commandments to exterminate Amalekites. Of the 613 mitzvot followed by Orthodox Jews, 3 refer to the Amalek, to remember what the Amalekites did to the Israelites, not to forget what the Amalekites did to Israelites, and to destroy the Amalekites utterly. The rabbis derived these from Deuteronomy 25:17-18, Exodus 17:14 and 1 Sam 15:3. Rashi explains the third commandment, from man unto woman, from infant unto suckling, from ox unto sheep, so that the name of Amalek not be mentioned even with reference to an animal by saying this animal belonged to Amalek, as enumerated by Nachmanides. The 3 mitzvot state, 598 Deut 25:17 remember what Amalek did to the Israelites, 599 Deut 25:19 wipe out the descendants of Amalek, 600 Deut 25:19 not to forget Amalek's atrocities and ambush on our journey from Egypt. In the desert, Amalekites in the Bible, kings of the Amalekites, Agag, listing of Amalekite references in Hebrew scripture, Genesis 14:7. 36:12, 16, Exodus 17:8-11, 13:14, 16, Numbers 13:29. 14:25, 43, 45. 24:20. Deuteronomy 25:17. 25:19, Judges 3:13. 5:14. 6:3, 33. 7:12. 10:12. 12:15, 1 Samuel 14:48. 15:2-8, 15, 18, 20, 32. 27:8. 28:18. 31, 13, 18, 2 Samuel 1:1, 8, 13. 8:12, 1 Chronicles 1:36. 4:43. 18:11, Psalms 83:7, allies of the Amalekites. In the books of 1 Samuel and Judges, the tribe of Kenites are associated with the Amalekites, sometimes their allies, sometimes allied with the tribes of Israel. The Amalek people are invariably enemies of Israel. Saul's successful expedition against the unidentified city of Amalek, in the plain resulted in the capture of the Amalekite king, Agag. In Judges 6-8 in the story of Gideon, the Amalekites and the Midianites are said to have amassed a visible army of at least 135,000 encamped against Israel. In Roll's reconstruction, David Roll moves the Amalekites from the Negev and the Sinai to the northern land of Israel, in the neighborhood of Mount Carmel and Jenin. See New Chronology. Amalekites in post-biblical era. In Jewish tradition, the Amalekites came to represent the archetypal enemy of the Jews. The concept has been used by some Hasidic rabbis to represent atheism or the rejection of God. Noah Mazala, Elliot Horowitz and Joseph Stern suggest that Amalekites have come to represent an eternally irreconcilable enemy that wants to murder Jews, and that Jews in post-biblical times sometimes associate contemporary enemies with Haman or Amalekites, and that some Jews believe that preemptive violence is acceptable against such enemies. Armenians as Amalekites. Yiddish tradition identified Armenians as descendants of Amalek, an ascription once current among Eastern Jews. The tradition identifying Armenians and Amalekites goes back to the early 10th century, when it is attested in the Byzantine chronicle Josephus attributed to the southern Italian Jew Joseph ben Gurion. The Italian rabbi Obadiah ben Abraham of Bertinoro wrote to his father of the sects in Jerusalem, to which he had made aliyah late in the 15th century. He listed among the Christians the Latins, Greeks, Jacobites, Amalekites, Abyssinians. It may be that Byzantine Jews made the identification of Armenians and Amalekites to distinguish the former from the Greek Orthodox Christians, and its continued use seems primarily aimed to register the idea that the Amalekites still existed within the realm of Christendom. The Byzantine Emperor Leo V the Armenian, who ruled from 813 AD to 820 AD until his assassination by one of his top generals, Michael the Amorian, was known as the Amalekite apparently because of his approval of the Islamic prohibition against the depiction of sacred images. In 1839 the British Jewish Christian missionary Joseph Wolfe was struck by what he thought remarkable, namely, that the Armenians, who are detested by the Jews as the supposed descendants of the Amalekites, are the only Christian church who have interested themselves for the protection and conversion of Jews. After visiting Palestine that same year, the Scottish missionaries Andrew Bonar and Robert Murray M'Cheyne suggested that what they saw as a of peculiar hatred which the Jews bear toward the Armenians may arise from a charge often brought against them, namely that Ammon was an Armenian, and that the Armenians were the Amalekites of the Bible, attributing this to the fact that Armenians were the first nation to adopt Christianity in 301 AD. Late in the 19th century, the Russian traveler Joseph Judah Chorny reported hearing from the Jews of Georgia that the Armenians were descendants of the Amalekites. Another Jewish traveler reported that among Armenians who traded with Jews in eastern Galicia, there was a practice of mourning Haman unregistered trademark death on Purim, and lighting candles in his memory. Itamar Ben-Avi, in the newspaper Hazva in 1909, intervened in an editorial to speak on behalf of the Armenians who were reportedly being slaughtered by the Ottoman Turks, and protested at Jewish indifference to calls to help alleviate their plight. He characterized the reaction of some of his co-religionists as follows. A slight grimace on their lips, a short heartfelt sigh, and nothing more. The Armenians are not Jews, and according to folk tradition the Armenians are nothing more than ʻŌmālēqs. ʻŌmālēqs? We would give them help? To whom? To ʻŌmālēqs? Heaven forbid. Nazis as Amalekites. The Nazis and Adolf Hitler have been referred to as Amalekites. A prominent 19th and early 20th century Rabbi Joseph Chaim Sonnenfeld, claimed upon Kaiser Wilhelm's visit to Palestine in 1898, 3 decades before Hitler's rise to power, he had a tradition from his teachers that the Germans are descended from the ancient Amalekites. Samuel's words to Agag, "As your sword bereaved women, so will your mother be bereaved among women," were quoted by Israeli President Yitzhak Ben-Zvi in his handwriting in response to a telegram sent by Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann's wife pleading for clemency after he was taken to Israel and sentenced to death. According to the Hebrew Bible, Amalek lived in Canaan. Amalek dwells in the land of the Negev. The Israelites were instructed to kill all those who dwelled in Canaan. Thou shalt save alive nothing that breathes, otherwise it shall come to pass, that I shall do to you, as I thought to do to them. The Hebrew Bible ascribes Haman, who tried to commit a genocide of the Jewish people, to Agag, whom the Israelites, led by Saul, failed to kill. According to these verses, Hitler may be seen as a result of this failure. Palestinians as Amalekites. Noam Azallah has written that frequently Jewish fundamentalists refer to the Palestinians as the Amalekites of today according to the Old Testament, the Amalek were regarded as the Israelites' inveterate foe, whose annihilation became a sacred duty and against whom war should be waged until their memory be blotted out forever. Some of the modern political messianics insist on giving the biblical commandment to blot out the memory of the Amalek an actual contemporary relevance in the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians. The Palestinians have been associated with Amalek since 1974 when Rabbi Moshe ben Zion Isbzari of Ramat Gan made the association in a book. The equation began to circulate in Gershom Unum circles, and its full implications were spelled out by Rabbi Israel Hess in 1980. A former campus rabbi of Bar-Ilan University, Hess published in the university's student paper in February 1980 an article on the genocide commandment in the Torah, in which he concluded that the day is not far when we shall be called to this holy war, to this commandment of the annihilation of Amalek. Hess's reference to Amalekites was later taken in Israel to be an allusion to the Palestinian Arabs, especially since he spoke of a jihad. Against this holy war God declares a counter-jihad in order to emphasize that this is the background for the annihilation and that it is over this that the war is being waged and that it is not a conflict between two peoples. God is not content that we annihilate Amalek, blot out the memory of Amalek. He also enlists personally in this war because, as has been said, he has a personal interest in this matter. This is the principal aim. In 1982, Danny Rubinstein, in his book On the Lord's Side, argued that this notion permeates the Gushim Union movement's bulletins, citing one such article on the right to hate which affirmed, "In every generation there is an Amalek." The Amalekitism of our generation finds expression in the deep Arab hatred towards our national revival in our forefathers' land. In 1985, Yuri Iltal, in his Foundations of a Political Messianic Trend in Israel, argued that Hess's position is to be contextualized within a totalitarian messianic force, whose process he summed up as follows. Palestinians in the occupied territories were to be reduced to the halakhic status of resident alien. The promotion of Arab transfer, the implementation of the commandment of Amalek, involving the annihilation of Palestinian Arabs. Ron Jeeves also writes that in settler circles, the Palestinians are likely to be identified with the Amalekites, and citing the same pamphlet from the campus rabbi attached to Bar Ilan University, adds that the message is passed on through the religious schools where boys are taught that the Arab is Amalek. After Baruch Goldstein's massacre of Palestinians at the mosque in Hebron, Rabbi Arthur Waskow argued that Goldstein had decided to blot out the memory of Amalek by machine-gunning the Palestinian worshippers, and commented, "So then, in our generation, for some Jews the Palestinians become Amalek. Some Palestinians are terrorists. Some Palestinians call publicly for the state of Israel to be shattered. The archetypes of fear slide into place, all Palestinians are Amalek. And the fantasies of the powerless become the actions of the powerful. For in our generation, Jews have power, a unregistered trademark." After the death of Yasser Arafat, a declaration was issued by 200 rabbis of Pequot Nefesh asserting that the anniversary of the death of this Amalek of our generation should be celebrated as a day of rejoicing. Zionists as Amalekites. The anti-Zionist Haredi Rabbi Zalman Teitelbaum denounced the proposed draft of Haredi men by the Israel Defense Forces by saying the Zionists came from the seed of Amalek. There has never been such a sect that caused so much damage to the Jewish people. A senior rabbi in Israel's Shas party, Shalom Cohen, publicly labeled religious Zionists as Amalek, but later clarified that his remarks were aimed only at the Jewish Home Party, not all religious Zionists. Another rabbi associated with Shas, Shimon Badani, referred to Finance Minister Yair Lapid and the Jewish Home Party as Amalek. The Neturei Karta are a Haredi group known for their radical opposition to the State of Israel and extreme wariness with regard to non-Haredi Jews. Historically, Neturei Karta equated Zionism with Amalek and Nazism. For some Neturei Karta rabbis the very word Amalek is read in gematria to mean politics, which in their view is something pious Jews should never engage in, since politics for them constitutes galut, or exile. See also, Herem, Judaism and Violence, New Chronology, Footnotes. References: The Punishment of Amalek in Jewish Tradition, Coping with the Moral Problem, R.V. Sagi, Harvard Theological Review Volume 87, No. 3 PA 323-46. External links: Wipe Out Amalek, Today? Shabbat.org, Amalek, based on the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Remember Amalek, A Lesson in Divine Providence, Remembering Amalek, Lasu, Popular Culture and the Disciples of Amalek, Antiquities of the Jews, by Josephus Flavius, The Jewish Encyclopedia, 1901-6, Amalek, A Kabbalistic View of Amalek, Amalek, Catholic Encyclopedia article, Between Rephidim and Jerusalem, Amalek Symbolism in Relations between Israelis and Palestinians, Contemporary Amalek, Hirarim, a blog post by Rabbi Gil student explaining Rav Soloveitchik's controversial view that the Nazis were considered Amalekites.